All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're doing a full-blown business autopsy on the unsung architect of the UK dance music scene. We're going to explore a truly fascinating case study of massive cultural success that was completely derailed, and not just once, but twice, by some very specific project failures. But before we break down exactly why this massive empire totally collapsed, we really have to ask a foundational question. Who actually democratized underground dance music for British youth? Now, if you ask mainstream music documentaries, you'll probably hear names like Pete Tong or Paul Oakenfold. But if you look at the actual source material and the real history of vinyl records in the 1980s, well, it tells a completely different story.
The real answer is an Anglo-Indian immigrant named Morgan Khan. And in his own words, people have tried to change the history, and it hurts him. Khan realizes that his monumental cultural impact has essentially been completely erased from the history books. So, we're going to unpack his journey today to figure out not only what he built, but critically, exactly why he lost the whole shebang.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the unsung dance music hero. Second, Failure 1, the British Motown. Third, the Street Sounds Revolution. Fourth, Failure 2, the magazine trap. And finally, erased from the history books. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the unsung dance music hero.
Picture the UK music industry in the late 1970s. The sheer barrier to entry that Khan faced back then was honestly staggering. The industry was rife with institutionalized racism, and dance and black music simply weren't considered, serious art. Khan was working as a postboy, literally living out of the record label's office, and he had to fight tooth and nail just to persuade executives that the underground club music he was hearing actually had massive mainstream potential.
And against all those odds, Khan scored some absolutely huge early wins. He effectively planted the seeds for literally every root of dance music that eventually blossomed in mainstream UK pop. I mean, he licensed the very first rap smash, Rapper's Delight, for the UK market. He brought a young Dr. Dre over for his first ever UK show. He championed Britfunk. He was so far ahead of the curve, it's just staggering. But as we'll see, that level of ambition can be a serious double-edged sword.
Which brings us to Section 2, Failure 1, the British Motown.
So Khan launches the Streetwave label back in 1981 with this wildly ambitious goal. He wanted to bring Detroit to West Acton. Basically, he wanted to create a British Motown for homegrown UK artists. And he actually scored an initial hit right out of the gate with an artist named Alton Edwards. But almost immediately, the wheels just started to come off the wagon.
So why exactly didn't we get a British Motown? Well, the sources point to 3 fatal flaws that really any entrepreneur or creator can learn from today. First off, he completely lacked the long-term business infrastructure needed to nurture a massive roster of artists. Second, he was constantly clashing with artist management over agreements, which totally stalled their momentum. And third, and honestly, perhaps most importantly, Khan himself admitted he was just way too impatient. Developing homegrown artists takes years of careful grooming, right? And Khan was this young buck who wanted instant results. He simply couldn't wait.
But that failure forced a pivot, leading us to Section 3, the Street Sounds Revolution.
Because he was basically too impatient to develop artists from the ground up, he pivoted to a truly genius solution. He started compiling already hot US imports into affordable, full-length LPs. Think about the market reality back then. Buying a single US 12-inch import would cost a suburban kid £5, which was incredibly expensive. So Khan took 12 of those massive underground tracks, threw them onto a single Street Sounds LP for roughly the same price, and completely democratized the music. 57. That is the staggering number of chart entries his Street Sounds compilation series racked up in just over 5 years. No joke, he completely changed the face of the UK charts. He was going toe-to-toe with major pop stars, bringing hip-hop, electro, and soul directly into the bedrooms of kids all across the country. And his formula was just relentless. I mean, he'd literally fly to New York on a Friday, grab the master tapes of whatever was hottest in the clubs, cut the record on a Monday, and have it sitting in UK stores by Friday. Plus, he utilized grassroots pirate radio networks to promote them. The major labels were so baffled by this lightning-fast success that they actually started feeding him their own artists to put on his compilations, just so they could break them into the market. But that takes us right into Section 4, Failure 2, the magazine trap. Because, once again, Khan's ambition completely overreached his actual infrastructure. In 1985, he launched a weekly black music magazine called Street Scene. And rather than supporting his music empire, the magazine just bled his company dry. Combined with the major labels finally waking up to the market in 1987, the entire StreetSounds empire was forced into total insolvency by 1988.
To really grasp why this magazine failed so spectacularly, you have to look at how he lost focus on his core product. Khan admitted he left the wrong people in charge of the magazine while he was busy focusing on the records. The result? Wild, unchecked expenses. We're talking about an employee taking a single £2,500 taxi fare. Yes, an overnight cross-country joyride on the company dime. It perfectly highlighted a complete lack of financial constraint that ultimately doomed the whole project.
And on top of bleeding cash on the magazine, the market reality violently shifted. Major labels finally woke up and realized the huge financial potential of house and hip-hop. Khan was used to securing independent licenses for, a few £1,000s. Suddenly, A&R guys like Pete Tong were flying out to Chicago with £250,000 blank checks. Khan, who was completely drained of resources by his magazine venture, just couldn't compete with those massive corporate war chests.
Which leads us to Section 5, Erased from the History Books.
So, after all that foundational work, why was Khan written out of the history books? First, the massive financial fallout of that 1988 collapse left a lot of people out of pocket, which naturally generated a ton of industry resentment. Second, this myth developed that the 1987 Ibiza scene was UK dance music's year zero, which completely ignores all the electro and hip-hop groundwork Khan laid years prior. And third, Khan himself notes that as an Anglo-Indian with a pretty abrasive reputation, he just didn't fit the palatable image that mainstream music documentaries look for when casting their historical heroes.
But what's really wild is that despite the betrayals, the total lack of credit, and 2 massive business failures, Khan is still this indefatigable force. He remains passionately opinionated, openly declaring himself appalled by bedroom DJs putting out weak beats. But he's endlessly optimistic that true world-changing talent, the next Prince, is out there waiting to be discovered.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. Morgan Khan's dual business failures, his impatience with his label, and his total lack of oversight with his magazine absolutely cost him his empire. But those failures didn't erase his actual cultural impact. So why do we let industry politics and financial missteps dictate our music history? And if someone this pivotal was erased, what other histories are we getting completely wrong? Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the history you're handed.